Welcome to the Stewardship Sessions, the podcast where money meets meaning. Here, we talk about building wealth with wisdom, shaping a mindset rooted in purpose, and pursuing a mission guided by faith. I'm your host, Jason Stanley, and together we'll explore intentional living, one conversation at a time.
All right, welcome back. So, I thought we'd talk about a couple things today in terms of money mindsets, how we get these ideas of money, how they get handed down to us, and how we can start to look at our children and educate them in a healthy, proper way around money. Growing up, a lot of people hear a lot of different things about money. As a child, I remember you just never talked about money. I remember my parents at one point not having a lot. Local church would bring groceries to our doorstep, and then later on in life they did well, but I never knew what my parents had. It was a taboo topic. You just didn't talk about it. But there were a lot of things that they would say that were negative in context about money. A lot of times it was, we can't afford that. Money doesn't grow on trees. And while those are simple kind of knee-jerk reactions to certain things, right? When you're talking to your kids, or maybe you heard some of these things as a child, that starts to actually wire itself in, that starts to become your foundational beliefs about money, is that you don't have enough, or, money doesn't come easily. You have to work hard. All of these things around money, and money really isn't any of those things. We build a lot of emotion around money, and our parents did too. And it can be a stressful topic. But I think it's really only stressful because, we get these belief systems around it that are passed down from generation to generation. So as we talk about building family wealth, we have to start to rewrite a lot of that in our own minds. And then how we deal with our children, and how we start to talk to kids about money, and how to see money and handle it and view it and steward money, because that's really what this life is about. We don't own anything, right? Last time we talked, I made that point. Everything that you have is going to get passed down, whether it's soon or later. We don't know how long we're on this earth. So everything we have is going to be passed down. We don't really own it. We're stewarding it. And it can either be passed on in a good way, or it can be passed on in a bad way. And that's our belief systems too. We can either pass on good beliefs, or we can pass on negative beliefs. So, maybe you grew up and you heard, oh, money doesn't grow on trees. Who do you think I am? Rockefeller. We can't afford that. And those are all very limiting beliefs around money. And as I've talked about in previous podcasts on this show, the words that we use really create our reality. And I don't mean that in a mystical sense. It becomes the way that you see the world. So if things are good, you tend to see the world good. If you have good mental talk. If things are bad, if you are constantly looking at the negative of every situation, life tends to feel negative. And so, again, this isn't mystical, wishful thinking. It's about how you look for opportunities. So when you say stuff like, I can't afford, you're immediately shutting down the possibility for you to find opportunities to be able to afford. So instead of saying, I can't afford, I'll say, I will find an opportunity to afford. Now, if I choose to get whatever it is that I said I can't presently buy, that's a different topic, right? I may not choose to do that when I'm able to afford it. But by saying, I can't, you immediately shut down the possibilities, right? I think it was Henry Ford that said, whether you believe you can or you cannot, in either situation, you're correct. And what he was saying is again, it's not mystical. It is the self-belief. There's a story of, long distance runners, the mile long runners. And it used to be believed that it was impossible to run a mile in 4 minutes or less. And the interesting thing is for a long time, nobody could do it. And then one person broke the 4-minute mile. And within a month, I think like 20 other people did it. And so what changed for those 20 other people? What made the difference? It was simply the realization that it was possible. They had all the potential to do it before. That one person believed it was possible, and so he was able to do it. And once he did it, other people saw it and they believed it. And, this goes back to something that I've said a lot. You have to believe something before you'll see it. We live in a world that says, I'll see it and then believe it. And if that's what you're waiting for, I'm going to tell you, you're always going to be disappointed because you're never going to be able to see what it is that you're trying to accomplish until you believe that it's possible. And that's a hard thing to get to. It's really hard to get to the point where you believe something so intensely. You can see it, you can feel it, you feel the emotions around it. And then all of a sudden, it comes to real life. And I don't think that this is laws of attraction. I don't think this is the universe rearranging itself or anything like that. I think it's simply how God designed us. That we are designed, Matthew, in the book of Matthew, it talks about it in prayer. It says, if you believe you have received it, you will receive it. Again, not laws of attraction, because there's an alignment, in my opinion, that you have to do with God's will in order to get there. And not everything that you want, you're going to get. But at the same time, when we're talking about money, it goes without saying that you have to really view money in a positive light. Because if your viewpoint on money is always negative, then you're never going to have enough. You're always going to live in lack, and you're always going to be struggling. So, things like, you have to work hard for money. It doesn't come easy. Who do you think I am, Rockefeller? Money doesn't grow on trees, that kind of stuff. I would say open up that talk, right? And maybe even go a little bit absurd with it. Money comes easy, right? Money comes easily and freely to me, and I can afford, what I desire to be able to get, and that kind of stuff. And so when you start to use that language, now on the flip side, I will caution this: don't go buy stuff that you can't presently buy to try to convince yourself you can afford it. That's called going into debt. That's called making bad decisions financially. So again, life is about compounded returns. Money is about compounded returns. So if you can be good with a little bit, you'll be even better with more. If you aren't good with a little bit, you'll be worse with more. It doesn't matter how much you have. And that's why history is wrought with stories of people who come into great wealth. NBA players, NFL players. I think the statistics are like something like 90%. And that may be wrong, maybe a little bit less than that, but it's a very big number are bankrupt within 3 years of leaving the league. Lottery winners, most lottery winners end up worse off than before they won the money. And everybody has this belief system, well, if I just had more money, then everything's going to be fine. And what I would tell you is more money complicates certain parts of life. And it's not the people coming to you for it that necessarily complicate it. It's that it is a complex tool, and you have to understand how it works. And stuff doesn't make you happy. We have this very horrible kind of mindset in this society that we believe stuff and accumulation of stuff makes us happy, when actually what we're doing is putting ourselves in our own prison, because the more stuff you accumulate, the more headaches you have, the more problems you have. So say you go out and you buy your fancy Ferrari, or you buy a boat, or whatever it is, right? I own an airplane. I can tell you right now, I'm not disillusioned about what an airplane takes to own and operate. It's expensive. And there's stuff that constantly has to be worked on. Same thing with a boat, those types of things. So they complicate life, and you have to be prepared for it. So it's not just the acquisition of something, it's being able to take care of it once you get it. And so when you're talking to kids, one of the things that I think is really important is to start to teach them early on positive affirmations when it comes to money, positive talk around money, and show them. So in my family, here's what we do. I'm very open with my children about the type of money I make, how much money I make, and that kind of stuff. I joke because I just said type of money, like it's a different type. There's good money, bad money, blood money, old money, new money. Everybody talks about these different types of money. Is just money. Okay. So it's not a type of money, but I do talk to my children about what I earn. And I talk to my kids about how I steward what I've been given. And so to include, I do not like getting recognition whenever I give money. I do it very privately because I do believe that's scripturally based. But one of the things that I do is every time I write out a tithe to my church or to support a different organization, I will sit down with my kids and show them what we're doing. And in our family, we will pray over that. We will pray that God uses that, for His purposes to help other people, And we do that as an exercise to teach them the value of being able to give. And when you're giving of your time, when you're giving of your money, you're doing so from a position of abundance, right? You can't sit down to go do tithe, to give, to donate, and do it with a negative mindset. You have to have that position of abundance. You're saying, I have more than enough, and therefore I can afford to do this. I can afford to help other people. I can afford to give. And so, the idea that you're suddenly going to become generous if you get more money is kind of a farce. If you don't do it now, you'll never do it. And there's this process that we go through, I think, subconsciously when we give. Again, we're giving from that position of abundance. And when you're living life in the abundance that you actually have, then you start to realize more into your life. And it's not, again, I'm not a fan of laws of attraction and stuff like that. I think it is how we view the world. And when you view the world as abundant, when you view your life as being abundant in all areas, whether it's your relationship, your money, your health, that type of stuff, now you open up the doors to being able to see opportunities for you to accomplish more, for you to have better health, for you to have, a better relationship. You start asking the questions how rather than why not. And I think that's really the most important thing. And so as you're talking to kids about money, as we, help families start to learn how to build wealth together, one, we have to start with our own personal beliefs around money. And if those beliefs that have been passed down to us, because a lot of what we do with money is inherited. Even if you're not inheriting the money itself, you're inheriting the beliefs. We get taught from a very young age a lot of different stuff, and how we view the world and stuff is based a lot on how our parents dealt with us. And I'm sure you've dealt with this. There are many times where I'll sit down, I'll say something to my kids, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds just like my dad, And it's simply because we start to inherit these systems and stuff. And so, but you can change them. You can change how you say things, and it takes some practice, but it's compounding returns. So you start little and you just keep working at it over and over and over again. And so every time you catch yourself saying something negative, rewriting that into a positive type of script, I think helps you be able to see opportunities around you, helps you see where the opportunities lie. So if your belief is that all wealthy people are evil, it's going to be very hard for you to become wealthy, because your belief is that they're evil. Therefore, if you become wealthy, you will be evil. And I've seen this play out in a real world scenario. I was working with a guy one time who was making a lot of money, almost $2 million a year, take home. And he had nothing to show for it. He was in debt up to his eyeballs. He was blowing it faster than he could hold on to it. And one of the questions I asked, I said, well, tell me what your mother said to you about money. And he said, well, my mom always said if you made over a certain amount of money, you were evil. And I said, and you love your mom, right? And he said, yes, I do. And I said, okay. Is it any wonder then that you were raised hearing this over and over and over again? And so in your subconscious mind, in order for you to have your mother's approval, you have to jettison all this money, because if you don't, she's going to see you as evil. And he was surprised by that. And consciously, he said, well, I don't think so. But we do a lot of things subconsciously that we don't realize that we're doing. Maybe you have a nervous habit. Maybe you chew the inside of your lip. You chew your fingernails. You pick your eyebrows. People have all kinds of little nervous habits that they do that are subconsciously driven. They don't realize they're doing them. When they're stressed out, they have certain things that they default to and that kind of stuff. And the same thing is true with money. So we have all these little tapes that we play over and over and over again in our subconscious that really determine how we view and handle money. And it takes some rewiring of that. It took a lot of rewiring of that in my own life. My parents, again, struggled a bit. I heard a lot of negative context around money. I saw my parents fight about money, and they were not pleasant arguments. The threat of divorce was thrown around money, and it is still one of the number one reasons why people get divorced in our society is money. And so again, it becomes how do you change that? How do you change that in your own life? How do you make sure that doesn't just continue to revolve in your own life and in your kids' life? And it starts with, like I've said before, sitting down and starting to map out what you want life to look like. How do you want your family to view and handle money? How do you want your family to view and handle each other? And start writing out your mission, your values, and your goals as a family. And then that gives you the roadmap. And now it starts to become a lot easier to talk about it and share it. And so, again, when we're talking to kids, when I'm talking to my children, I show them what I earn. They know what my expenses are. We talk about what things cost, why we do the activities that we do, why we go out and make investments, why whenever I get paid, the first thing I do is make a tithe first, and then another piece goes to investments, whether it's physical, hard asset investments or stock market investments, that kind of thing. And then the rest is what we use to live on. And so by showing them that discipline, my goal is to help them learn those tools in their own life and be able to use that. Now, I have an 18-year-old right now, and he knows everything about everything. And if you have one, you know what I'm talking about. And, I watch him. He is still trying to impress the world around him. And one of the things that I've tried to teach my kids is that, a lot of times we do things trying to get other people's approval, and other people don't even notice. They really are working on trying to get your approval. It's kind of this messed up, situation that we fall into. We're constantly trying to get other people's approval, they're trying to get ours, and nobody really notices what you're doing. So people don't notice your car as much as you think they do. They don't notice your clothes as much as you think they do. And a lot of times if you have something that's nicer, it creates some animosity. I'm not saying don't have nice things. I like having nice things, but you have them because you want them, not because you think it's what you should have. And we do that a lot in our society. We get things that we think we should have, because if we get this, then other people will like us. And that's just complete nonsense. And when you can unwind yourself from that, you can't completely devoid yourself of caring of what people think. That's a farce. It's a lie. You always are going to care what people think. But when you can separate your physical possessions from that and recognize that if you do certain activities, it will compound in your life, and you will actually be able to live a better life than had you going out and started buying a bunch of stuff to make other people happy. So wealth is actually accumulated through compounded returns, right? It is the compounding efforts of doing things consistently over time that allow you to amass more wealth in this life. And it also allows you to be able to pass more on. And I believe that it is our job. I work with people all the time that are like, oh no, when I die, I want to spend my last dollar. I don't want my kids to inherit anything. I worked for this and all that kind of stuff. And I would say, I base my life on the Bible, and scripturally that's not sound. We're told a wise man will leave his children's children an inheritance. So again, looking at things in terms of a family, how do we start to build the family up? How do we start to help the family recognize how to build wealth together? It doesn't mean that the family all works in the same job, or the same business or something like that. It's about, how do you prepare your family? How do you take your children and give them good self-talk around money? How do you start to help them see the value of what money is? And how do you teach them the little efforts that compound over time? And again, we talked about this before. If it is that you're just putting money away for some far off future event, that becomes really hard to manage. When you rewrite that talk and you say, I'm buying freedom, I'm starting to buy more of my freedom with each dollar that I put away. Now it becomes something that's more tangible, something that you can actually feel in that moment. And it becomes exciting. And then it becomes a game, And when money became a game for me, it suddenly became a lot easier to come by. And money became this game of, well, let me see if I can do this and see what that comes out to. It doesn't mean that every investment that I've made has worked out. It doesn't mean that every business decision that I have made has panned out. I've lost money along the way. I've tried things and lost money. But the point is, you keep working at it, and you don't focus on the negative. You focus on what you learn, right? So failure is our greatest tool, and teaching kids failure, I think, is one of the most important things. There's a really good book, and I think it's called The Blessings of a Skinned Knee. And it's basically about teaching kids how to have failure and giving them enough rope to feel failure, but not be catastrophic. Because catastrophic failure can really sideline you. We see people have horrible failures and rise up out of it and go do great things. But then we see other people get completely sidelined for their whole life because of one failure. And so I think you have to recognize that failure is a part of life, that as humans, we don't have all the answers. We don't know everything. We're not going to make all the right decisions, right? And so, but what you have to do is take that situation and be able to learn from it and adjust it so that you are successful the next time you try something. And so again, it comes down to consistency and persistence. So how consistent and how persistent are you? And I think it's great to start teaching kids early on about how money works. One of the things that I did whenever my children were younger, even whenever I wasn't, I was still rewriting a lot of my own self-talk around money. But one of the things I did early on with them was I set them up with a mock portfolio. And we would sit down and they would pick out the stocks that they wanted to invest in. And I did it as a kind of a reward system. They would pick it and, they would give me their $1 or $5 that they earned. And we would buy the stock in the mock portfolio. And if it went up, I would give them, kind of the equivalent multiple of that, so that they saw in real time what it looked like to have their money start multiplying and working for them. And so when you see money as a tool to be able to go out and work for you, now it really starts to become fun. Now you start going, how much can I deploy to go do work for me? And really, when you're investing, when you're putting money away into stuff and you start looking at the opportunities around you, maybe you're buying a rental property, maybe you're buying, stocks and mutual funds and that type of thing, you start seeing the result of that compound in your life. And you can start to see it as money is working for me. I'm not working for money. Money's working for me. And how do I get more of my money to work for me? Because the nice thing about money is it has no emotion. It's not a human. It doesn't tire out. It doesn't get bored. It doesn't change its plans, any of that stuff. So it will sit there and work tirelessly 24 hours a day. If you have the right mindset around it. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to get to. That's a hard position for a lot of people to get to, because everything in our society is geared towards making sure that you stay a consumer. Go to school, get a good job, work, retire. And again, I'm not a fan of retirement. I think that retirement is based on an antiquated ideal of when we were generally a manufacturing society. We're no longer a manufacturing society. Maybe some of you do work in manufacturing, but retirement was based on this idea that you had to stop working at some point in time because you physically couldn't do it anymore. We're more of an intellectual society now, intellectual manufacturing. The type of job that I'm in, working in finance. As long as I have my mind, I can continue to work and maintain usefulness in it. I don't have to be able to walk. I don't have to be able to do anything else. I have to be able to use my mind. And I would say that's a good majority of people out there. And so instead of talking about retirement with my kids, I call it work optional, And there was a really interesting experience that I had with my children. We were on vacation during spring break and we were walking along the beach, and it was just me and my boys, and their mother and I divorced. We're both remarried, and her and her husband both work in public service, and they constantly are talking about retirement. They know down to the minute, the hour, the day that they get to retire, because they really are not enjoying what they do. And my kids on that walk, my oldest said, "Dad, you never talk about retirement." And I said, "Well, son, that's because I enjoy what I do. I enjoy the process of business. I enjoy being able to deploy money and do investments and stuff." I said, I enjoy it. So I don't look at life as I have to accumulate this stuff and then stop. I look at it as, what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to impact the world around me? How do I get to make the world a better place? How do I steward what I've been given? And by doing that, I remove this idea that I have to accumulate, retire, and then hopefully be able to have enough to make it throughout the rest of my life. And I said, I told my kids at that point in time, I said, you get to see two very different viewpoints on money. And look, their mother's a great lady. We're very, very good friends. We deal with money in very different ways. And it's not because I made more. At the time, when our kids were young, I made less than she did. But I recognized early on that if I didn't take the time to rewrite and change my thought processes around money, then I would never, ever be able to go where I wanted to be able to go with it. I would never be able to accumulate and amass more if I had these limiting beliefs. and if I kept consuming and stuff like that. So it took a lot of effort to undo a lot of that. It took a lot of radical changes in my life. And I've talked about some of those before, downsizing the type of home that I lived in was one of the big ones, because we're taught as you make more money, you should get a bigger home, that kind of stuff. You should get a nicer car. And I did the reverse of that. When I first did it, there was a lot of anxiety that I had because it was counter to everything I'd been taught. And so I was, think of it like shock therapy, if you will. So I was basically putting myself in a situation where I completely changed in a very radical way everything that I thought you were supposed to do. And maybe that's not for you. And I'm not suggesting that you go try that, especially if you have a family that's used to certain things. That might be a rude awakening for everybody. So the nice thing is I was single at the time. I was a single father, and it was an easy thing for me to do at that point in my life. But in doing that activity, what I was able to do was start to rewrite a lot of the beliefs around money that I had. And suddenly doors opened that I didn't see before. It's not that the doors weren't there. It's not that the opportunities weren't there before. I couldn't see them because I basically was saying things that didn't allow me to see them. It's kind of like if your spouse has ever asked you, hey, go grab something out, go grab this out of the refrigerator, or go grab the salt out of the cupboard for me, right? And you get there and you open the door and you're like, I don't know where it's at, right? And then they walk up and it's right in front of your face. And they're like, how'd you not see that? Well, it's not that you couldn't see it. It's the fact that once you say you don't see something, right, your mind literally just shuts it off. You're not able to see it. We see this in traffic accidents. Why there's so many people that'll look straight at a motorcycle and pull out in front of it. And that's because we're programmed to look for cars. Most people are programmed to look for cars unless you've actually been on a motorcycle, ridden one, recognize them and stuff like that. A lot of times your brain will just kind of short circuit and only be looking for cars. And so that's why you see this happen all the time, where somebody will look straight at a motorcycle rider, pull right out in front of them, and cause an accident. It's how our brains work. And our brains are really interesting machines to deal with, because a lot of how we view life, how we handle things, how we handle our money, how we help our kids all starts with our own wiring. And so, I think that it's really important to look and be honest with yourself. What are your beliefs around money? Do you believe that money can make you better? Do you believe that money allows you to impact the world better? Or do you believe that money makes you a worse person? Maybe you had a negative experience with somebody who had money and they were rude to you, and your perception was that they were wealthy or something like that, and they were rude to you. We live in this society that constantly wants to blame wealthy for everything. They don't pay enough in taxes. They should pay more in taxes. There are problems. They shouldn't have that much money. Nobody should be allowed to have, what Elon Musk has or what Steve Jobs had and stuff like that. And so long as you continue those beliefs, you're always going to be in that limited state. And I'm not saying idolize those people. I don't agree with that. But recognize that if you applied a lot of the same principles, you're probably going to be a lot better off than where you are today, right? So if you take somebody like an Elon Musk or Steve Jobs and you look at how they've lived their life and how they've invested and how they've used their money, if you applied just a little bit of the same principles, you're probably going to see a really good result from that. Because again, money is not the root of all evil, right? The Bible says it's the love of money. So if you love it and that becomes your God, then that becomes a problem. But it's not the root of all evil, right? It's not the problem. It's not what causes the problems in this world. A lot of what causes our problems in our life is how we view and handle life around us. And so you can't change everything that's going to happen to you. You're not, you've heard me talk about my time with cancer. I didn't choose to get that. There are some people out there that'll tell you that it's based on choices. It's not. There's no activity that I did where I sat there and worried about that stuff all the time. It just is something that showed up. So I couldn't change that, but I could handle the way that I viewed and dealt with it, and recognize that I wasn't going to allow that to slow me down or stop me from being able to continue moving forward. My job as a human is to steward what I've been given by God in this life, and I believe in that wholeheartedly. So, my job was to do everything I could do to make sure that I was healthy. I'm not perfect at it. I still enjoy my cheeseburgers and fries too. I still enjoy having a drink every once in a while and that kind of stuff. So, but looking at how you were taught about money, how you were taught about these things, and the self-talk that you use, and recognizing in your life where you need to rewrite that, I think helps you be able to work with your children moving forward. Again, this is about how do we take the family and start to build wealth, because we are in an interesting place in our society. And if you look at every great civilization that ever existed, there is a regular occurrence that takes place. And over time, it becomes harder and harder for people to move up the socioeconomic ladder. And we're seeing that in our own society right now. That our economy is really no longer driven solely by the middle class, and we're seeing a lot of the middle class shift backwards. And it's not because the system's stacked against them or any of this stuff. It has to do with a lot of old ways of thinking that don't work in today's world. And as long as we hold on to that, we get the same result over and over again. And so, again, I'm not saying that there's things that don't contribute to that. There are absolutely things that contribute to that. There's, economic policies and stuff like that contribute to it. But at the same time that you have part of the middle class sliding backwards, you have another part that's actually moving upward. And again, it just has to do with people's thinking around that. And it's interesting when you go through bad economic times. If you look at some of the biggest companies in the U.S., the Fortune 500s, a lot of them were started in really negative economic periods. I encourage you, go back and do the research. Look at how many companies started during the Great Depression that are still in existence today, that are still some of the most profitable companies. I'm not saying you have to go start a company. I'm just saying that what was different about the founders of those companies versus everybody else during that time period? The difference was they saw opportunity where others saw lack and problems and hardship. And when your focus, wherever your focus is going, that's where your energy is going as well. So if you're giving energy to something, you're giving life to it. And I'm a firm believer of that. And so you look at these Fortune 500 companies, these founders of these companies that started these companies at the worst economic possible time ever in U.S. history, during what we called the Great Depression. And you go, what in the heck was wrong with those people? What made them think that they could do that? And it's really simple in that they just had a different way of looking at things than most of the majority of people had. And so money is not this hard thing to get to. It's not, there's a ton of money floating around out there. But it's being diligent in little things over and over again that allow you to start to accumulate, to be able to build wealth as a family and as an individual. And once you understand those basic principles and once you start to apply them, it starts to happen. And it takes time, it takes patience, because it's actually a pretty boring process, And so you have to be patient, you have to be diligent in it and look at things differently. So whenever we go through a bad economic time now, I don't look at, oh my gosh, stock market's going to crash. Well, there's no such thing as a stock market crash, right? There's market downturns, there's recessions, there's depressions, there's contractions, there's, those types of things that we can actually measure. But a crash is not something that we can actually measure. There's no quantifiable method to call something a crash, right? It's a catchphrase that's used by the media to get you scared, to get you to watch. And what happens when you're operating in that position of fear? Well, you're afraid to put money to work into the stock market, right? But the stock market's been around for a long, long time, and it's going to continue to be around for a long time. And it continues to grow despite a lot of people's negative talk around it. And so instead, what I do in that situation, when the stocks start to drop, my stock prices start to drop and stuff like that, I say they're on sale. It's like going shopping and being able to find a shirt that I wanted or a jacket I wanted, and it's on sale. And I'm like, well, I can buy it cheaper now, And so it's a really simple exercise, but it's hard to put into practice. But I think the more you can do this in your own life, the more you can start to teach your kids around this and help them start seeing the opportunity. Because I do believe that even in the worst of situations, there is always an opportunity for you to grow, for you to better yourself, for you to improve your life and your finances. And when you start to look at the world in those possibilities, it becomes a lot of fun. It becomes the game. And the game is, can I do more? Can I give more? Can I accumulate more? And that kind of stuff. And that becomes more of a game than it becomes work. And when you view it as a game and not work, it becomes fun, So that's what I have for you this time. Hope you found usefulness out of this. But I do think it is important to start to share with your children early on your disciplines around money. By doing that and helping them write positive talk around money, that will carry them forward through their life. They're not going to get it right straight out of the gate. They're going to mess up, and that's okay. But you can help them develop that foundation that they're going to come back to and apply in their life. And that's how you start to, as a family, build wealth together. So until next time, have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.